Okay, let's jump in. We've all seen it, right? That never-ending stream of self-help tips,
Oh, yeah.
and you're scrolling looking for something that actually, works, something that clicks without needing a manual.
Those aha moments.
Exactly. Those moments that give you a real understanding. So today, we're going to try and cut through some of that noise.
We are. We're diving into a real classic, Stephen Covey's The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. We're using excerpts from the Dawn Vision audiobook channel on YouTube. It's a good way to get the core ideas.
Right, think of this as your focus guide. We've sort of pulled out the key principles, the stuff that really matters, according to Covey. And our goal here is, well, it's to get past those surface level tricks and really understand the foundations of effectiveness. What Covey calls the principle-centered, character-based stuff.
Absolutely. And Covey kicks things off by pointing out a big issue with what he calls the personality ethic.
The personality ethic.
Yeah, it's this common way of thinking that focuses mostly on skills, techniques, having a positive attitude, the outward stuff.
The quick fixes, the image management.
Exactly. But Covey's argument is that stuff is secondary. It's important, maybe, but without a solid character foundation, things like integrity, basic honesty. Those techniques are, well, they're like building on shaky ground.
Like building a house without a foundation. Or like cramming for a test versus actually learning the material.
That's a perfect analogy he uses. You might pass the test, the short-term goal, but you haven't actually mastered anything. The real work, the foundation, it's just not there.
So what happens if you try to use those, influence techniques, but your character isn't quite there?
Well, that's where it gets tricky. Covey argues that even if you have good intentions or you sound really persuasive, if your character underneath is flawed, people eventually see it as manipulation.
Right. That lack of authenticity, it just erodes trust, doesn't it?
Completely. It undermines everything. So the big insight early on is real effectiveness isn't about the quick fixes. It's built on character. Anything else is just not sustainable.
Makes sense. He talks about reaping where we haven't sown, right?
Yes, exactly. You can't expect results without putting in the actual work, following the process. Like farming, you have to prepare the soil, plant the seed, water it. You can't just wish for a harvest.
No shortcuts?
No shortcuts in nature, and he argues, no shortcuts in personal growth either. You have to pay the price.
And this applies to organizations too, you said, like trying to buy a company culture.
Oh, definitely. Think about companies trying to, suddenly create this amazing culture with rah-rah speeches or superficial training programs.
Or just merging two companies and hoping to the best.
Right. But if there's this underlying low trust, maybe because leadership isn't walking the talk, those efforts just fall flat. You can't buy trust or a healthy culture. You have to cultivate it, build it piece by piece.
He has that story about his daughter's birthday party, doesn't he? Trying to get her to share presents.
Yes. It's very relatable. He goes through everything, asking nicely, reasoning, bribing.
Even threatening.
Yeah, and finally just forcing the issue, taking the toys. We've all felt that frustration, I think.
Well, absolutely.
But the big realization for him was that he was relying on his authority, his position as the parent. He called it borrowed strength.
Borrowed strength.
And the problem with borrowed strength is that it actually creates weakness. It might get compliance in the moment, but it undermines the relationship. It creates fear instead of willing cooperation, and it stops the child or whoever from developing their own internal reasoning and maturity.
Wow. So forcing compliance actually backfires in the long run. You get the opposite of what you really want, which is connection and willing participation.
Precisely. Anytime you use position or authority to force something, you might win the battle, but lose the war, so to speak. The insight is stark. Borrowing strength builds weakness in yourself and in the other person.
Okay, so this ties into his idea that the way we see the problem is the problem.
Exactly. If you're stuck looking through that personality ethic lens, you keep reaching for those surface solutions, better techniques, more persuasion, when the real issue might be much deeper, rooted in character or trust.
Which explains why some executives get tired of those quick fix psych-up trainings.
They sense it's superficial. They want something with substance, something principle-based that delivers long-term results, not just a temporary boost.
All right, so if the personality ethic isn't the answer, what is? You mentioned the inside-out approach.
Yes. This is Covey's fundamental shift. Instead of starting with the external, what we do, what we say, we start inside. with ourselves.
Focusing on.
Our paradigms, how we see the world, our character, who we fundamentally are, and our motives, why we do what we do. That's the starting point for real effectiveness.
Inside out. So like,
Yeah.
be the change you want to see. Is that the idea?
That's a great way to put it. He says, for example, to have a happy marriage, be the kind of person who generates positive energy. Being comes before having.
Okay, so focus on becoming the right kind of person first, and the desired outcomes, like a happy marriage or success, will follow more naturally.
That's the core principle. And central to this is understanding our paradigms.
Our mental maps, our lenses.
Exactly. They're the way we interpret everything. And
Yeah.
they shape our attitudes, our behaviors, everything. Covey talks about different centers that can act as our main paradigm.
Right, like being spouse-centered or money-centered.
Or family, work, possessions, pleasure, even being centered on friends or enemies or church or just the self. Each of these acts like a primary filter.
They dictate how we react to things.
Completely. He uses that example of getting a concert invitation, but then your boss asks you to work late.
Ah, yeah, I remember that.
Someone who's spouse-centered might react totally differently than someone who's work-centered or money-centered. Their priorities, their decisions, even how they feel about the situation, it all stems from that core center.
It sounds like being centered on some of those things could make you pretty unstable, actually. Like being enemy-centered. You'd
Yeah.
be constantly reacting.
Totally. Or pleasure-centered, always chasing the next high. Covey argues these centers don't provide lasting security, guidance, wisdom, or power. They're often dependent on external factors or shifting emotions.
So what's the alternative center he proposes?
Principle-centeredness. Basing your life, your decisions, your reactions on timeless fundamental principles like fairness, integrity, honesty, human dignity.
Okay. And why is that better?
Because principles are stable. They don't change with circumstances or moods. Being principle-centered gives you an internal compass, a solid foundation. It allows you to look at situations more objectively, consider all the factors, and make proactive choices based on your values, not just react based on emotion or external pressure.
So it's about consciously choosing principles as your guide rather than letting other things dictate your life.
Exactly. Understanding your current center and consciously shifting to a principle-centered paradigm is key to this inside-out approach.
Okay, so we understand paradigms and the inside-out approach. How do we actually translate this into action? This is where habits come in, right?
Yes. Habits are where the rubber meets the road. Covey defines a habit very specifically. It's the intersection of three things.
Three things.
Knowledge the what to do and why to do it. Skill the how to do it. And desire the want to do it, the motivation.
Knowledge, skill, and desire. Got it. All three are needed.
All three. He gives the example of communication. You might know you should listen empathically, knowledge, but if you don't actually know how to listen that way, skill, or if you, frankly, don't really want to understand the other person, desire, it won't become a habit.
That makes total sense. You need the whole package.
Right. And he talks about this upward spiral of growth, being influences, seeing influences changing. As we work on our knowledge, skills, and desire in alignment with principles, we change how we see things, which changes who we are, leading to higher levels of effectiveness.
It sounds like breaking old habits and paradigms isn't always easy, though.
No, he acknowledges it can be challenging, even painful sometimes. Letting go of old ways of thinking, even if they weren't serving you well, can feel risky. But the motivation comes from aiming for something higher, genuine, long-term happiness and fulfillment, which he argues are rooted in living by correct principles and building character.
Okay, principles, character, habits. It's all interconnected. Now, there's a really core principle he introduces, PPC balance. What's that about?
This is absolutely fundamental to long-term effectiveness. P stands for production, the results you want, the golden eggs.
Right, the outcomes.
And PC stands for produces those results. That's the goose that lays the golden eggs.
Ah, the famous goose and golden eggs analogy.
Exactly. It's about balance. You need the eggs, production, but you also need to take care of the goose, production capability. If you only focus on maximizing egg output and neglect the goose's health, eventually.
And no goose, no more eggs.
Precisely. You destroy the asset that produces the results. Covey stresses you need to maintain a balance between the two.
Can you give some examples of breaking that balance?
Sure. With physical assets, it's like running a machine flat out without doing any maintenance. Production, P, might be high for a while, but eventually the machine, PC, breaks down.
Okay, makes sense. What about with people?
Think about employees. You can push them relentlessly for short-term results, but if you burn them out, neglect their development, or create a low-trust environment, their capability to produce effectively long-term PC diminishes.
Or like that restaurant example he uses, watering down the clam chowder.
Yes, that's a classic. They focused only on short-term profit, P the eggs, by cutting costs and quality, but they damaged customer trust and loyalty, PC the goose. Eventually, the customers stopped coming.
They killed the goose.
They killed the goose. And he makes a really important point about employees. You need to treat them like volunteers in the sense that you can't buy their best contribution, their creativity, their hearts and minds. That requires building trust and investing in them, PC. The old shape up or ship out mentality really misses the mark on this.
So true effectiveness is this constant balancing act. Short-term results versus long-term health and capability.
That's the core of it. Whether it's your health, your relationships, your finances, your equipment, you need to maintain that PPC balance. Neglecting PC for P always leads to trouble down the road.
Okay, that's a really powerful foundational principle. So with that understood, let's get into the habits themselves. Habit 1, be proactive.
Right. And being proactive for Covey is much more than just, taking initiative.
Not just being busy.
No, it's fundamentally about taking responsibility. Recognizing that between stimulus and response, we have the freedom to choose our response based on our values, rather than just reacting based on feelings or circumstances.
So reactive people are driven by feelings, conditions, the environment.
While proactive people are driven by their chosen values, they subordinate feelings to values.
Okay. And he talks about the circle of concern and circle of influence.
Yes, this is crucial. Your circle of concern includes everything you care about: global issues, other people's problems, the economy. Lots of things you might have little or no direct control over.
Things we worry about.
Exactly. Your circle of influence, on the other hand, is smaller. It contains the things you can actually do something about: your attitude, your skills, your choices, how you treat people.
And the key is?
Focus your energy on your circle of influence. Proactive people work on the things they can change. Reactive people spend their time and energy worrying and complaining about things in their circle of concern, which often makes them feel more powerless.
Right, because focusing on what you can't control just drains your energy.
Precisely. He tells that story about the executive whose boss had weaknesses. Instead of complaining, circle of concern, the executive focused on compensating for those weaknesses and leveraging the boss's strengths, circle of influence.
And his own influence grew over time because he was being part of the solution.
Exactly. And being proactive isn't about being pushy or aggressive. It's about being resourceful, value-driven, understanding what's needed, and taking responsibility to make it happen. He points to someone like Gandhi as a prime example of quiet proactivity.
Wow. So it's about building that internal proactive muscle in small, everyday moments.
Yes. How you handle traffic jams, respond to criticism, keep small promises. These things build your capacity to handle major challenges proactively. He even suggests a 30-day test. Work only in your circle of influence for a month and see what happens.
That's a powerful experiment, focusing only on your own responses, your own actions.
It fundamentally shifts your perspective from victim to agent. Covey says that exercising our freedom to choose actually expands that freedom. If we don't exercise it, we become increasingly controlled by external conditions. It comes back to responsibility, the ability to choose your response.
Foundational. Okay, habit 2. Begin with the end in mind. This feels like it's about vision, direction.
Absolutely. This is the habit of personal leadership. Covey makes a critical distinction between leadership and management.
What's the difference, according to him?
Leadership is about doing the right things. Management is about doing things right.
The jungle analogy again. Managers sharpening machetes, leader climbing the tree.
Jen shouting, "Wrong jungle!" Exactly. Leadership asks, what are the things I want to accomplish? Management asks, how can I best accomplish certain things? Leadership comes first. You need the vision before you optimize the execution.
Especially now, with things changing so fast. A map might be useless if the landscape shifts.
Precisely. You need to compass your principles, your end in mind, more than a detailed roadmap sometimes.
So this leads to the idea of a personal mission statement, like a personal constitution.
Yes, it's about deeply considering your values, what you want to be and do, what principles you want to live by. Writing it down helps clarify it and provides a standard against which you can measure everything else.
And he contrasts this principle-centered approach with being centered on other things, like we discussed earlier: spouse, money, work.
Right, because those other centers, while maybe important parts of life, don't provide that ultimate, unchanging security, guidance, wisdom, and power that comes from being centered on correct principles. Your principles are always there, regardless of external circumstances.
So crafting that mission statement involves really identifying your core values and principles.
Yes, and also thinking about the different roles you play in life: parent, spouse, employee, friend, community member, and setting meaningful long-term goals within those roles that align with your overall mission.
And this isn't just for individuals. He talks about families and organizations doing this too.
Definitely. A shared mission statement in a family or organization can be incredibly powerful. He gives examples like IBM's core values or a hotel chain where the mission was deeply ingrained. The key, he stresses, is involvement. People commit to what they help create.
Makes sense. Okay, moving to habit 3. Put first things first. This sounds like time management, but you said it's more self-management.
Yes, it's the practical application of habits 1 and 2. It's about organizing and executing around your priorities on a day-to-day, moment-to-moment basis. It's about discipline, but discipline driven by your purpose, your mission.
The discipline to do what's important, even when it's not urgent or maybe not enjoyable.
Exactly. He quotes E.M. Gray. The successful person has the habit of doing the things failures don't like to do. They subordinate feelings and impulses to their values and purposes. This requires the proactivity of habit 1 and the clear vision of habit 2.
Okay, and he introduces the time management matrix, the 4 quadrants.
Quadrant first is urgent and important crises, deadlines. Quadrant third is urgent but not important interruptions, some meetings. Quadrant fourth is not urgent and not important trivia, time wasters.
And the key quadrant is?
Quadrant 2, important but not urgent. This is where true effectiveness lies. Things like prevention, relationship building, planning, identifying new opportunities, recreation, sharpening the saw.
But we often get stuck in quadrant 1, putting out fires.
We do.
Hmm.
Or we escape to quadrant 4. Effective people minimize time in 3 and 4 and try to shrink quadrant 4 by spending more time in quadrant 2, focusing on prevention and planning.
It requires saying no to things, doesn't it? Even urgent things, if they aren't important according to your mission.
Absolutely. And that ability to say yes to the important quadrant 2 activities often means saying no to other things, even seemingly urgent ones. This requires that clear sense of priorities from habit 2 and a principle center.
People often say they lack discipline for this.
Covey argues the issue often isn't discipline itself, but that their priorities aren't deeply internalized. They haven't really done the habit to work. When you have a burning yes inside your mission, it's easier to say no to the less important things. A quadrant 2 focus grows naturally out of a principle center.
So what are the practical steps for becoming a quadrant 2 self-manager?
He suggests things like connecting daily tasks to your mission, reviewing your roles, identifying your big rocks, key priorities for the week, scheduling time for those big rocks first, delegating effectively, organizing weekly, maybe using a planning pool that supports this, and consciously making time for quadrant 2.
Okay, so those first 3 habits, proactivity, end in mind, first things first, that's the private victory, self-mastery.
Exactly. They build independence and character.
And now we move to the public victory, working effectively with others.
Right. Habits 4, 5, and 6 focus on interdependence. But Covey stresses you can't achieve effective interdependence, public victory, without first achieving independence, private victory.
You need that personal foundation first, like algebra before calculus.
Perfect analogy. You can't just fake your way into good relationships if your own character isn't solid. He shares that story about the man worried about his wife's grilling phone calls.
Yeah, highlighting the pain of low-trust relationships.
It really does. And this leads to the idea of the emotional bank account.
The EBA, deposits and withdrawals in relationships.
Exactly. You build trust, make deposits, through things like understanding the other person, showing kindness, keeping commitments, clarifying expectations, having integrity, and apologizing sincerely when you make a withdrawal.
And withdrawals are things like breaking promises, being disrespectful, betraying trust.
High trust accounts are essential for effective interdependence. The skills for interacting well with others flow naturally from an independent, trustworthy character built through habits 1, 2, and 3.
Interdependence sounds like it has huge potential, but also risks if mishandled.
It does. Great potential for synergy and achievement, but also a source of deep pain if based on manipulation or low trust. Covey warns against applying personality ethic quick fixes to relationship problems. You need to address the root issues of character and trust. And the PPC balance applies here too. The relationship itself is the PC, the goose.
Okay, let's get into habit 4. Think win-win.
This is the habit of interpersonal leadership. It's about seeking mutual benefit in all human interactions, solutions or agreements that are good for everyone involved.
So everyone feels good about the decision and is committed to the plan.
Ideally, yes. It's contrasted with win-lose, competitive, lose-win, martyrdom, lose-lose, conflict gone wrong. And crucially, there's also win-win or no deal, agreeing to disagree agreeably if a mutually beneficial solution can't be found.
No deal is a valid option.
Okay.
And achieving win-win involves several dimensions.
5 key ones: character, relationships, agreements, systems, and process.
Let's start with character. What traits are needed?
3 are essential: integrity, being true to your values, keeping promises; maturity, the balance between courage to express your feelings and needs, and consideration for others' feelings and needs; and abundance mentality.
Abundance mentality.
Yes.
The belief that there's enough for everyone.
Yes, versus a scarcity mentality, which sees life as a zero-sum game where one person's gain is another's loss. Win-win requires believing that creative, mutually beneficial solutions are possible.
And relationships. That ties back to the emotional bank account.
Absolutely. You need a high level of trust built through consistent deposits to even begin thinking win-win effectively.
Then agreements. How do you structure win-win agreements?
They need to be clear about 5 things: desired results, the what, guidelines, the parameters, resources, available support, accountability, how results are measured, and consequences, what happens, good or bad. Be firm on the ends, but flexible on the means.
That allows people to manage themselves within the agreement, like that bank training program example.
Exactly. They set clear objectives and consequences, win-win agreement, and then let the trainees figure out the best way to learn flexible means. It was far more effective than traditional methods. And supportive systems, like reward systems, and a supportive process, how you arrive at the agreement, are also vital.
Okay, habit 5. Seek first to understand, then to be understood. This feels huge for communication.
It's absolutely critical. This is the habit of empathic communication. It means listening not just to reply, but to genuinely, deeply understand the other person's perspective, their frame of reference, their feelings.
And most of us don't listen that way, do we?
Often not. Covey lists ineffective styles: ignoring, pretending, selective listening, even attentive listening that's still focused on our own agenda. And we tend to jump in with our own story using autobiographical responses.
Right, probing with our own questions, evaluating and judging, advising before we understand, interpreting their motives.
All of which block real understanding. The key is to understand their paradigm, their map, before you try to explain yours. Remember the young lady, old lady picture?
Yeah, same picture, totally different perceptions depending on what you see first.
Exactly. Empathic listening involves diagnosing before you prescribe. It means reflecting back not just the words, mimicking content, but also rephrasing the content in your own words, and crucially, reflecting the underlying feelings.
Reflecting feelings.
Yeah.
Sounds hard, but powerful.
It takes courage and security, especially if you disagree. But when you make someone feel genuinely heard and understood, you make a massive deposit in their emotional bank account. They become much more open to then understanding your perspective. You have to be influenceable to be influential.
Like the guy who couldn't get his presentation across until he understood his boss's perspective first.
Or the professor securing funding by understanding the committee's needs. It's about getting inside their frame of reference. It leads to accurate information, builds trust, and creates the psychological space for real problem solving.
Okay, habit 6. Synergize. This sounds like teamwork on steroids.
Kind of. It's the habit of creative cooperation. Covey calls it the highest activity in life. It's where the whole truly becomes greater than the sum of its parts. 1 + 1 = 3 or 10 or 100.
So it's about valuing differences, not just tolerating them.
Valuing them. Actively seeking out different perspectives to create new possibilities. Third alternatives that didn't exist before. It combines the win-win motive of habit 4 and the empathic communication skills of habit 5 to tackle tough challenges creatively.
It sounds exciting, but maybe a bit unpredictable.
It can be. The outcome isn't known in advance, which requires trust and vulnerability. People need to feel safe to express ideas, even seemingly crazy ones. He talks about his class that spontaneously reinvented itself because the environment allowed for synergy.
And it applies in business, too. Creating mission statements, planning meetings.
Absolutely. When people with high trust accounts genuinely listen to understand, habit 5, and are committed to finding better solutions together, habit 4, they can transcend their individual limitations and create something truly new and better.
What gets in the way of synergy?
Defensiveness, insecurity, win-lose thinking, low trust. People needing to be right. Basically the opposite of the principles we've been discussing.
Yeah.
Interestingly, he also talks about interpersonal synergy, integrating our own logical left brain and creative right brain.
Using your whole self. And he mentioned force field analysis.
Briefly, yeah. As a tool to identify driving forces, pushing for change, and restraining forces, holding things back in a situation, synergy helps find creative ways to reduce restraining forces rather than just increasing driving forces, which often increases resistance.
Got it. Okay, finally, habit 7, sharpen the saw. This is about renewal, right?
Exactly. It's the habit of self-renewal, maintaining and enhancing the greatest asset you have. It's about regularly investing in yourself across 4 dimensions.
4 dimensions.
Physical.
Yes, taking care of your body through exercise, nutrition, rest, stress management, building endurance, flexibility, strength. This impacts everything, including your proactivity, connecting with your core values, your center, your commitment to your mission statement. It's about leadership of your own life. Highly personal could be prayer, meditation, music, nature, reading inspiring texts. Like Arthur Gordon's story about renewal at the beach, it's quadrant 2 activity.
Continuing to learn, expand your mind. Reading, writing, planning, visualizing, seeking out new knowledge and perspectives. Avoiding mental stagnation. Remember the school trying to teach animals to fly and swim equally. Don't limit your mental diet.
And social emotional.
This is primarily developed through our relationships by practicing habits 4, 5, and 6, thinking win-win, seeking to understand, synergizing. It's about building connection, developing empathy, contributing meaningfully. Success here often depends more on intrinsic security and emotional maturity than intellect. Seeing the potential in others, like those teachers with high expectations.
And the key is balance across all 4.
Absolutely. Neglecting any one area negatively impacts the others. You need consistent, balanced renewal in all 4 dimensions to maintain effectiveness and avoid burnout. It applies to organizations too. They need physical, economic, mental talent development, social, emotional relationships, and spiritual purpose integrity renewal.
Wow, that covers a lot of ground. So, wrapping this up, what's the big takeaway?
I think the core message is pretty clear. Real long-term effectiveness isn't about surface techniques. It's rooted in timeless principles and solid character. It requires starting from the inside out, mastering yourself first, and then committing to continuous, balanced self-renewal. The habits all work together.
It's a holistic system. Okay, here's something to really chew on. Take a moment and think. What center is really driving your decisions right now? Is it principles or something else? And maybe more practically, what's one small sharpen the saw activity, physical, spiritual, mental, or social emotional, that you could commit to this week? Just one thing that you feel would give you the biggest long-term boost.
That's a great challenge. It's not about overhauling everything at once, but taking that first proactive step. This deep dive is really just the start. Applying these ideas is a lifelong journey.